So the myth of normal means, first of all, that what we consider to be the norm is neither healthy or natural, in fact, quite the opposite. Number one. Number two, what we consider abnormal in terms of illness is often a normal response to unhealthy circumstances.
Hello, friends. Welcome. Welcome. My name's Tami Simon. I'm the founder of Sounds True, and I want to welcome all of you here for Insights at the Edge Live, especially Sounds True 1 members. A special welcome to you. And if you're not yet a member of Sounds True's new digital platform and community membership site, Sounds True 1, you can learn more by hitting the Learn More button on this page, or come visit us at join.soundstrue.com. All right, let's get started. I am absolutely thrilled about having the opportunity to host this particular edition of Insights at the Edge Live with Dr. Gabor Maté. Let me tell you just a little bit about Gabor. One thing is that Hungarian born, he lives now around the corner from where I am here in Vancouver, Canada. He is a physician who, after 20 years of family practice and palliative care experience, worked for over a decade in downtown Vancouver's East Side with patients challenged by drug addiction and mental illness. I have a deep appreciation of Gabor's work when it comes to helping us understand the journey of healing we're on individually and also collectively as a culture, the challenges we face and the empowerment that we can find. What I know is the more I immerse myself in Gabor's writing, the more tenderized I feel. That's tender in the heart. And also, the more I learn, the deeper the excavation process is related to my own personal healing, and also understanding what's actually going on with other people and our society as a whole. And that's some of what we're going to be talking about today. Gabor is the author of 4 best-selling books. They've been translated into more than 30 languages. Those books include In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, Close Encounters with Addiction, When the Body Says No, The Cost of Hidden Stress, and what we're going to be talking about today, which is Gabor's new book. It's called The Myth of Normal: Trauma, Illness, and Healing in a Toxic Culture. Gabor, welcome.
Tami, it's nice to be with you again.
Awesome. It's awesome to be with you. Thank you. Thanks for making the time for this. To start out, your new book, The Myth of Normal. First of all, it's 500 pages. And I have to say, a very worthy investment of time and energy. If a nonfiction book about the deepest recesses of personal and collective healing could be a page turner, dare I say, your book is. That's how I felt reading it. I was so absorbed. So thank you. Thank you for taking the time and putting in all the energy to write it. And that's where I want to start here at the very beginning. You mentioned in the book that there was something in you. You knew you had to write this book. So here, starting engaging in this process at age 75 to age 78 when it was published, what was that inner call?
Well, I must say the process began 10 years before. The idea of bringing together everything I've learned and intuited and experienced in terms of health, illness, and its context in a social, psychological, emotional, spiritual setting. That's been with me for a long time. And it took me 10 years to actually gather the research. I don't even know how I did it, but I collected 25,000 different articles, medical journal reports, scientific papers, newspaper articles, filed them all, read a couple hundred books, interviewed 200 or 300 people, had them transcribed. that information is then what had to be then transformed into a readable book over the last 3 years. So the process of preparation, gestating this book, has been going on for a long time. And what was it? I just needed to bring it all together. I just needed to say it all. I just needed to take a wide view lens of our society, of our culture, of our individual self, and all the interconnections, and manifest them on the paper. That just had to be done. And at some point, and many times I got totally discouraged, almost wanted to give up. In fact, at one point, I had a contract for this book, and I gave the money back to the publisher saying it's too much, I can't do it. Until the book just insisted that it be done, and it finally was.
Well, as I said, I want to start by taking a moment to thank you, because I'm sure it was a whole heck of a lot of work. So thank you. Now, explain the title, The Myth of Normal, for people who are hearing this title for the first time.
Sure. So we tend to assume that what is normal is also healthy and natural. And in a certain sense, that's true, at least in the medical sense it is. So as I've often said, what is normal in terms of blood pressure or temperature or blood acidity, the normal range is also what is healthy and natural. And outside of the normal range, life is threatened or even eliminated. So what we used to, like normal body temperature, is also what's healthy and natural. Now, in society, what we used to, though, we make the assumption that it's also healthy and natural. And the argument I'm making is that in today's culture, what we consider to be normal, in the sense that what we used to is neither healthy or natural, in fact, undermines health and promotes disease, so that illness itself, whether of mind and body, is in many cases a normal response to abnormal circumstances. So the myth of normal means, first of all, that what we consider to be the norm is neither healthy or natural, in fact, quite the opposite. Number one. Number two, what we consider abnormal in terms of illness is often a normal response to unhealthy circumstances.
Now, Gabor, for people who are wanting to understand your lens, if you will, the way you see disease, mental illness, all kinds of health challenges, and the healing process, can you just give us, right here at the beginning, kind of the big map, if you will, how you see it?
Well, the big map has been charted by indigenous cultures and spiritual teachers forever. So the Buddha talked about the interconnected co-arising of phenomena, that nothing arises on its own, that everything, this dies because that dies, for this to exist, that has to exist. John Donne talked about how no man is an island. Walt Whitman says that every atom that belongs to me as much as belongs to you. Indigenous cultures here in North America, when they talk about health, there's the medicine wheel, which has 4 quadrants that includes our biology, our emotions, our psychology, our mind, our intellect, our social relationships, not to mention our spiritual nature, and modern medicine, I didn't say modern medicine, modern science has shown that it's all interconnected, that we're inseparable, that our minds and our bodies are not distinct entities. In fact, they're manifestations of a single process is what they are. And emotions and physiology, immunity and psychology, they're not separable entities. Scientifically, they're not separable. And there's literally tens of thousands of articles, newspaper, I should say, scientific papers that have shown how all that fits together. Not to mention the great American physician, George Engel, who in 1977 proposed what he called a biopsychosocial view of health, which means that our biology is inseparable from our psychology, which of course is inseparable from our social relationships. So the lens through which I'm looking at is congruent both with ancient spiritual insights, traditional wisdom, and modern science, which is completely ignored by modern medicine in practice. So that's the lens through which I'm looking, and that's very much informed by my own experience as a physician, where at a certain point, I couldn't help noticing all these interconnections. What I didn't know is that there was all this incredible research proving these interconnections, and which is still not still hasn't entered the purview of medical practice.
One of the things you write about, Gabor, in The Myth of Normal is how we can look at disease not as some kind of intruder from the outside necessarily, but instead as some process that's happening inside of us interacting with the outside world and what's happened to us in particular in our early childhood and challenges that we faced. Tell me how this changes our view when we don't think of disease as intruder.
Well, so in some cases, if I am subjected to high dose of radiation or
Sure.
a poison, you might say that it's coming from the outside. But most chronic illnesses of mind or body, and I'm talking about malignancy for the most part, autoimmune disease, mental health conditions, addictions, we make a certain assumption even the way we talk about them. So for example, I have this book here in my hand. I have it, which assumes that there's an I, which is one entity, then there's this book, which is another entity. We're not synonymous. One is not expression of the other. I can take this book, I can put it down, I can read it, I cannot read it, I can give it away. It's not me. When I say, or when we say, I have depression, or I have ADHD, or I have multiple sclerosis, or I have rheumatoid arthritis, we're also making an assumption. We're making the assumption implicitly that there's this thing called rheumatoid arthritis or multiple sclerosis or depression. Then there's an entity called me, and this entity has that entity, but they're separate and they have a life of their own. So that I have a life of my own, and multiple sclerosis has got a certain prognosis, that's going to go this way or that way, regardless of what happens with me. That's not how it is. I'm saying there's no such thing as disease as a thing. I'm suggesting that what we recognize as illness represents a process that reflects and manifests my life from my conception onwards. And that things that have happened to me emotionally, psychologically, socially, relationally, have a huge impact on my physiology. And then so that by the time I get asthma or by the time I get rheumatoid arthritis, a whole lot of things have happened in my life, and that identified disease is simply the manifestation, the endpoint of a long-term process. So that means disease is not a thing, it's a process. If that's the case, then how I live my life may have significant impact on that process, and that gives me a whole lot of agency to deal with that particular problem, challenge that the disease represents. So I'm talking about disease, what we call disease, as process rather than as sort of automatic entities.
Now, Gabor, in reading The Myth of Normal, as you mentioned, there are all the interviews that you did with people, and you bring many of those excerpts in. There's the scientific studies that you bring in, and then you also share quite a bit about your personal story. And maybe it's just because of the kind of person I am, the way I process information, the way I learn. I noticed it was when learning about your personal story and your personal adverse childhood experiences, which were quite adverse, and the journey you've gone through as a human being to be at this point now in your healing process. That was the part that, in many ways, furthered my own inner excavation the most, which is how I used the book in terms of what the biggest gift it gave me, yes, was this big, greater understanding of our shared condition. But it also was quite an excavation tool for me in my own life journey healing process. And I think it can really be that for people who engage deeply with it. So back to you. I wonder if you can share a bit about how you linked your own early childhood experiences and help our audience understand that with some of the suffering in your life, both physical and mental and emotional. And then the part that I really want to get to is your healing journey and the breakthroughs you've had. So if that's okay with you, I'd love to make that a big part of our focus here of the conversation.
Of course, and thank you for that way of putting it, because my intention in writing the book, if I had to formulate an intention, would be to give people a map to themselves. And I didn't want them to understand, or simply to understand a whole lot of concepts and correlations and facts. I also wanted them to really understand themselves. And so if the book helped you in that process, I'm really gratified by that. And of course, that had to involve me, because long before the writing of the book and through the writing of the book and since the publication of the book, this process of self-excavation is one that needs to continue. So very much I believed and have trust that the more I'm willing to share what's appropriate to share about my own life, the more people will get to understand themselves. And I know that's an aspect of my speaking and writing that people appreciate.